Good day to you. This is Anagalactic. It's already the 10th of September. It's now in the wee hours of the morning when I tend to do my work during this heat spell. What I'd like to cover today is a synopsis of the topics that have been broached in my lecture series, which I wished had become a presentation series, but I never really did master the art of the imagery. Although I do use it extensively, most of my presentations do have diagrams and inset windows. Some of them have music, even sound effects. But really, of the 1,200 videos that I've produced, by far the meat of it has gone to geometry, because that was my original intent, was to broach a new geometry, which I've attempted to explain to you in just 4 videos already in just one day, September 9th, yesterday, in this 2025 year in Chico, California. Getting near the end of time. Things are starting to run amok, run out of control, but they've been running amok and out of control for several thousand years. So it's actually nothing new. It's just a new aspect to doom. And it is getting closer, and that is part of the vital message that every human must know about somehow. And that sounds religious, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like I just said something very religious? Every human has to know what again? That there's a judgment day. Really, it's part of natural philosophy. It's not really religion. We call it death. You die. Well, that's actually a problem. It's a scientific problem. In other words, it's a problem that can be approached rationally, but not very far, because death is irrational. It doesn't make sense to a consciousness such as a full-grown human. We don't quite grasp death because we're alive. It's not really a question of being stupid or evil, or just living in a fantasy world of denial, just every day denying the fact that you're going to die. It's simply a fact. Well, I've always, throughout my, I guess you could say, my philosophical development, whenever engaging this topic, which at certain ages or at certain phases can be quite popular, and it can be brought up as a subject that several people might engage themselves in, some kind of club to talk about life and death. Well, that's what I brought up is it's not just death that's such a strange phenomenon. It's also birth. I mean, it's easy to ask the question, just throw out the question as if it were an obvious question, what is death, or why do we die? Or just, say something, there's going to be a day when you're no longer going to exist. Well, I would have to say that's a powerful image, because with age, you come to realize that it's inevitable. When you're young, you can rely on your innate sense of life to just simply disregard the issue because it's so far in the future. At least that was true of me, and I believe it's common. That it's not that we're running away from death. And Woody Allen made a good a good parody of this situation. He was living in New York, which is enough to make anyone neurotic. But, as a New York Jew, and he certainly was an amazing man. I really love Woody Allen. But he knew that he was a New York Jew. And so he used it, by which I mean they tend to be, just a little bit neurotic. If you were being chased from country to country for centuries, you might develop a certain neurosis, like, yeah. But they're also such incredibly intelligent people. I don't know how anyone cannot love the Jews. You take groups of people around the world. Well, the Jews are just special. They're really amazing. They certainly are overrepresented in the sciences and arts. For a population of 2%, I believe is among Europeans or Euro Americans. They're only 2% of the whole population. But my God, you got to admit, some of the greatest men that we can even name. Albert Einstein is probably the most famous example, but he's certainly not alone. And Woody Allen liked to portray a perpetually death oriented human, which I fully identified with, and a whole generation did. Woody Allen in the 1960s was absolutely beloved. And he's still kicking. He's became a tremendous director, but he was known for his comedy. Of course, he had a most amazing sense of humor. And part of his profile, his shtick, as you could even say, was to portray a harried, neurotic, just, but more specific, he was always thinking about death. And a lot of comedians have followed up on that. The subject of death is, I would say, a valid target for comedy if you think you can get away with it. But it is a little delicate because it is kind of, well, it's an intimate thing. It's like you're looking at yourself just stone cold dead and about to be taken away in a hearse. Or, death comes in many forms. You might picture yourself at the bottom of a pit being raked with machine gun fire too, or gassed. So I mean, there is a certain memory to people. They remember if they were persecuted and perhaps nearly exterminated by genocide. That tends to, be carried on as a sort of a a spirit of transmission. Like, yeah, your grandfather died in a concentration camp, and I'm lucky I'm even here. And you just hear, whoa, man, well, that's a form of facing death. And the way we do face death is usually not our own. That is, when we first come in contact with it, which is progressive. I mean, when do you first realize you're going to die? And the reason I bring this up is because religion is a major issue now. Well, wasn't it always? I believe that's fair to say. Religion is just a real issue with humans. So it's like death and taxes. You really can't run from it. You have to face it. Perhaps it's irrational. Perhaps it's illogical. Perhaps it makes you afraid. Perhaps it makes you angry. Perhaps it arouses a whole spectrum of emotions. Well, the proper thing to do then is rarely to turn your back and ignore. If you're being assaulted with emotional and even intellectual content, such that it's obviously important in some way, you should try to rationalize it. That's what we learn to do as men, is to think and really to plan, to evaluate. You evaluate the past and get knowledge from your experience, and then you apply it. Well, you're applying it toward the future. Well, that leads to death. I mean, you've got to figure that in as maybe you don't think it's the terminus, but it certainly is an end of one phase of existence. So what happens after that? A conscious person asks this. But it's a sort of a mildly dangerous or rudely provocative. It's like, why would you bring up death? It's not an ordinary topic of conversation that you just get together. Hey, let's have some cocktails or some tea. Let's have breakfast. Let's get together. Let's take our mutual time off together and just rap, man. Just drop some acid or take some mescaline and just rap. Or you're playing cards and drinking cocktails. Or you're watching, well, you're done with a football game, but you're still drinking beer, something like that. Or you go down to the Explorers Club and gather around with the other men wearing double-breasted coats, or they're very refined, and they start talking about philosophy and the subject. Well, what about death? Let's talk about what does it mean to die, or that can happen, but it's not normal everyday conversation like, hey, you haven't died yet. How do you feel? You don't bring up death, right? Well, And my point in bringing this up is that it is a religious topic as well for fairly obvious reasons. Once you face your death and you really rationalize it, or emotionally just freak out or whatever you do, or you embrace your death, oh my goodness, I can hardly wait to die. Whatever is your attitude toward death, every rational man faces it somehow. Now you can turn your back, and it's not we're not setting up a judgment seat here. This isn't like, well, some people just aren't as bright as others, or as religious or as good. It's something like that. No, this is just a human issue. It's a fascinating issue when it's treated well, because it's so powerful that every single human being must die, and half of us have already died. Well, where are they? I think there's two basic answers that absolutely are at opposite ends of any way of looking at that. One is, they're gone, man. They are in oblivion. They're nowhere, honey. And there's nothing to say. But then you would have to say, by some process of reasoning, an entirely different point of view has emerged among humans all over the world. In fact, it's fair to say that virtually or almost literally no human has ever sincerely thought that. No human thinks that death is oblivion. It's really a modern phenomenon. Although you can find it going back to antiquity, it's just... I should probably be cautious here and just say it's in a different historical cast. But I would say, and I believe fully reasonably so, that most men do not believe that death is the end of consciousness. They don't believe it's the end of a human individual existence, that there is something after death. And this has various characterizations depending on your extreme point of view. There are extreme points of view. The modern, you could say, pseudoscientific or Western European idea that has gained popularity, so it's not really trivial, is that when you're dead, darling, shut up. Really, it's just final. There is nothing after death. That's illogical. That cannot be true. For this very simple, straightforward reductio ad absurdum proof. And I claim to have discovered this proof. This is miraculous, in my opinion. So far, it's only been good for me. But from what I know of how knowledge can help people, hundreds of millions of people should learn what I know about that specious argument, because it's so prevalent and it's so nasty, that if you believe that death is not the end of consciousness, that there is something after death that you will experience. It's a very simple binary choice. Either there is or there is not. But the obvious, easy solution to that is there's not. And why? Because there's no evidence for afterlife. Absolutely zippity-doo-dah zero. No evidence. And it can be stated much more powerfully that there is provably nothing after death, because of the 16 billion people who have lived, half of whom are alive right now. Nobody has ever come back from death or reported, and no religious person has ever claimed to have have direct knowledge of death, in other words, that they did die, and then came back to tell us. Now, of course, because men are notorious deceivers, incredible liars, it just runs through everything we do. Anything that we know is true, by consensus, you would have to say we just are sure of certain things. Oh my God, no. There is nothing that you could possibly assert about it, about anything, that would not be violently argued, including the nature of death, which I would have to say takes precedence over most anything else you could name if you're looking to guide your future. What is the purpose of science or just rationality at all? It is to guide your future, or it has no purpose. You're trying to guide your future to good fortune, to a happy ending, a happy finish. And you just want to, if for no other reason, you want to rationalize what are your odds of this or that. Because we know about pain and we know about pleasure. Well, then we can also imagine eternity of either one. And death really is a boundary to that kingdom of just not knowing whether it's going to be eternal nothingness, eternal torment, which is called the brimstone flames of hellish perdition, or something, just eternal torment, which could be construed as boredom. If you woke up and you're still conscious, but there's just like nothing, you're just floating in space, and you would be in pretty bad shape if nothing changed. So oblivion is not a welcome notion. That your consciousness ends, well, that's illogical. Because then you must ask the counter question, why are you conscious now? There must be some reason. There's no way to account for consciousness except in terms of prior unconsciousness. That at one time, which was a very long time, you weren't anywhere. And religions cover this upside down, backwards, inside out, just transdimensional, just new dimensions, just alternate universes now. Anything to provide some scope for this incredible philosophical question, which I don't really believe it can be treated philosophically, and perhaps you must say it must be couched in philosophical language. But this is way beyond philosophy. There are two ineluctable facts of human conscious existence, such as I'm experiencing right now, and presumably so are you. That at one time that did not exist, and for an infinity of time past, you were not what you are now, which is conscious. And that after about 70 or 80 years, or sooner, it could be much sooner, it's over. And now you have no consciousness. You do not exist any longer. If you wanted to hedge your bet, you would say you do not exist in any known, provable, or conceivable form, something like that. But it is an end. There's no question that death is a terminus, quite profoundly terminating. But you see, there are two of these points in time. Going in the past, you could say, if you lived your life backwards all the way back to the beginning, eventually you would die. You would be conscious from the time of, being 50. And now you're going backwards 49, 40, 30. And now you're 10 years old. You're just going backwards through time. I know it doesn't really make sense, but in a binary directional sense, you can at least say, what if you went that way? If you go back in time, you die. Eventually, you won't have any. You'll go back to your source, which is what? I believe that's the right way to approach death, to address it rationally. is as a conjugal question. That anytime you say death, whatever you even mean by death, besides the obvious, you know what comes after that? You can't even address that question unless you have the proper context, which is obvious. At one time you had no consciousness. What about that? What about the infinity of time past? Where were you while all other people were living before you were born? What were they doing? You would certainly want to know before you assessed death. Did they all die? Now, I'm not trying to introduce resurrection. Although you can tell, I mean, you probably have thought, well, he may be leading up to talking about Jesus Christ, the one and only man who ever rose from the dead. Even that is contested, even by scholars, that is, biblical scholars. That Lazarus was raised from the dead, right? There are also at least two men, and it's usually cited as just two men, who never died, one of whom was Elijah, a prophet under the Israeli kingdom. And I'm sure you've heard of him. Elijah is quite famous, but he never died. And he's only one of two men to whom this legend attaches. Because from a scientific point of view, you would have to say that's just made up. What if it's not? But you see, it's not whether it's true or not. It's that you have to consider everything because you literally don't know. You don't know anything about death by definition. That's the one thing you can definitely say nobody knows anything about, because nobody has ever gone there. You could say, well, that's ridiculous, Scott. Everybody has gone there who is dead. Yes, but they don't come back. And so for all practical purposes, that's the same thing as saying that there is nothing after death. Because if there were, you simply can't know it. There's no evidence of anything after death. Well, is there or isn't there? I don't believe you can answer that question correctly, rationally, at all. Unless, you take some kind of... You would have to believe something. Well, in science, we prefer not to believe anything. We want to know. Well, when you're addressing death, you literally don't know anything about it. But logically speaking, you should be able to get at it. Well, I found the way. And it's the only way. Any discussion of death is going to be fruitless, in my humble opinion. And believe me, I've been involved in this for quite a while. At a religious level, it's deeper than even philosophical level, although those overlap. And scientifically also. I am a scientist. I believe fully in rationality as being divine. That is, it's a divine tool that we're meant to use, and whatever science says is true, as long as science gets the right answer, of course. But rational logic is for the purpose of discovering truth which never conflicts with anything religious. That's what I wanted to say. As well as give you a directive if you want to consider death rationally to get the answer you need about death. You must think about birth. But then you're going to find out that you're in a cascade sequence, which is good, because now you're on to a logical inductive process and a deductive process. You're trying to get an answer. What's your question about death? Well, where will I be after death is the most general form. What will I be? How will I be? Will I be? Assuming I will be, what will I be? Will I have the same memories? Will I be the same person? Will I be judged? Will I be damned? Will I be blessed? Will I be transformed? Will I be transmogrified? Do I go to another planet? Do I go to another dimension? Do I just, as the modern European rationalists say, you're nothing. That's the end of the universe as far as you'll ever know. That's illogical. That is not true. That cannot be true. Otherwise, what you're saying is there's no reason for consciousness. And if that's true, you should be a murderer and a thief and defy God and defy men and just do whatever you want. Kill everybody you need to kill in order to get what you want and need. Because once you're done with this life, you're done. There's no judgment. There's no God. There's no afterlife. There's no consciousness. You can't be punished. If you're Hitler and you want to kill all the Jews, that's the greatest thing you could do. If you can get away with it, the only penalty is if you get caught. But if you can get away with murder, that's survival of the fittest. Well, that's actually what's been happening all along, because there's a certain percentage of men who actually pursue that. And you could say it's unconscious, subconscious, forced, conditioned, a matter of their society, their culture, their upbringing, their level of sin, their level of knowledge of God. You can say anything you want about it. But as long as there are humans, there are parasitic humans who prey on others. And that's most humans, judging from history. Most humans are absolutely predacious and purely evil. But you see, that's also illogical. It's not that I'm just being emotional and wishy-washy. I'm showing you the extent of how illogical people can be. Now, you and I as scientists are much more than just technicians. We're not just doing math, okay? And we're not just sitting down like Sherlock Holmes and figuring out someone else's problems. Using math or geometry or logic or whatever the fuck you use. You're a human being. And you're that first and you're that last, and that's all that will ever matter. Is how you behave as a human being. To yourself, to other humans, to the angels, to God, to all the spirits, to every form of alien, whether they're good, bad, demonic, angelic, wonderful, nasty. The way you are in your life is who you are, and it's all you'll ever be. That is the bottom line. But here is the secret of the universe for religion, philosophy, and not being a retard. To actually be able to contribute and be rational and know what you're talking about and help yourself and others. Is that possible? It had better be. And the way to do that is to concentrate on your birth lineage. Physically, where do you come from? Not what's going to happen after you're dead. You can get that answer, but the only way you're going to get the answer is by looking in the opposite direction. If you want to know anything about death, you have to know where human beings originated. You must know that. And that's the sacred transmission of God. There is an answer to that. All you have to do is look. But there's one other ingredient. You also have to be morally spotless. Morally spotless. Nobody is. So we're all damned to hell. And that's what death is. It's your eternal punishment and mine. That's illogical. Unless you include Hitler, Stalin, Trump, Netanyahu, mobsters, murderers, thieves. What happens to them? So there is eternal punishment. There must be. Or eternal recompense. Hitler has got to pay. Well, so do you. So do I. And the way you find that out is by tracing back the history of humankind. Have you ever tried to do that? It's considered now to be a fool's errand. And anybody who believes in a transmission of information from the beginning of human history, the white European mathematicians want you dead because you're a threat to their children. You also have the Israelis that believe that you're a threat to their children. And the way to get rid of a threat to your children is to exterminate the threat. And every nation has had this policy. Kill your enemies. Kill them so that they no longer exist. Well, what if you do that to good people who are trying to heal the earth and do things right? How do you decide those moral issues? You can't. But if you think it through, you'll realize that morality is the basis of existence, not science in any way. Because science won't help you. Morality could. Because if you're good and not bad, there is a clear distinction between those two kinds of humans. One might deserve to live after death, but the other kind cannot possibly continue. That kind of person who is not good must be destroyed. But if humans decide that, we're all dead. And that's what's going to happen. Human beings will kill each other to the last human. And then there's nothing left. And humanity is extinct. The death of humanity. Let me ask you this, and we're going to close this off. Where, when, and how is the birth of humanity? Where do humans originate? If you can't answer that question, I'm tempted to say you're going to hell. And I'm probably right. But I don't want to confuse you with what must sound like a judgmental or subjective opinion. I am talking to myself. I'm addressing a person that I think is identical with myself. I am not putting myself above you. But I will tell you this in all seriousness and candor. I am 70 years old, and I've been studying these issues that I've been broaching to you since I was 17, nonstop, with every ounce of my integrity, strength of any kind. And I consider myself to be a guide now. And so I'm going to be telling you the way things are because I'm right. And I know the difference and can prove it. So you must know your human origins. And there are only two narratives. Either we know or we don't. And I think you know who's on which side. Those are the two sides. For everything. Either you know where you're from or you don't. And if you don't, then death is oblivion. And there's no such thing as morality. And genocide is exactly what you want to do. Because that's your only logical choice. Because you're immoral. Because you're stupid. Because you're evil. And that's the way the story will end. It's the only way it can end. It's the way it's ended for 8 billion people so far. And within the next few years, another 8 billion are going to join that group of dead men who are about to experience eternity. And if you don't believe that, it's because of all the things I just said, which I will summarize in one good word. You're retarded. And that's the nicest thing that could be said about you. And the upshot of that is, unless you listen to me, you're never going to figure out anything. You must listen to me now. Because I am the prophet of Islam now. thank you. Be sure that you stay tuned in, or you will be lost forever. I am the one that will guide you out of oblivion. Otherwise, you will be taken in the snares of the evil one. Okay? Dead serious. And then we're going to go into, in the next video, the definition of Islam, the definition of true religion, the definition of the prophets and their office, and the transmission we're going to go over in fine detail. The transmission sequence from the time of the first male and female human. That is well known, and that is Islam, which defines Christianity and damns Judaism. Okay? That's the distinction. The prophet welcomes the true Messiah. The Jews welcome the false Messiah. You will do that homework, and then I will teach you everything you need to know to be saved. Thank you. Keep looking up. We'll be right back.